Hey guys. So this is my second episode for the podcast. It's yet to be named. I need something clever. I will figure it out as I go. So I have a great guest today. He's actually one of my oldest friends. And when I started the podcast, he was one of my inspirations. He's on podcast. Neil, how many times a day are you on podcast on a typical week?
Not daily. I would say maybe like two, three times a week max.
Okay, but that's a lot. Um, and I would see him do these podcasts. I'll be hanging out with him. He'll be doing these podcasts on a range of topics, and it would just look really fun, right? Like it's a free flowing conversation. As you guys saw last week, I interviewed Kenner, who Neil actually introduced me to. Um, and one of the thoughts I had going into 2025 was I talk to these people all the time. They're my colleagues, my mentors, people I like literally confide in or seek advice from all the time, and they give me valuable insights that then I share with other people when applicable. Neil's one of those people. I'll call him literally randomly, 5 second call just to get an answer for a question I had, and he had it. Vice versa, right? Um, Not everybody knows Neil, so maybe Neil, do you want to introduce yourself, and I could
Sure,
talk about our history, how we know each other.
my name is Neil Patel. I'm the co-founder of an ad agency called NP Digital. Um, Serial entrepreneur focused mainly on the marketing vertical in both services and software. I've known Double since I was probably like around two-ish years old. I believe it was our grandparents that met in the old school apartment complex that we used to both live in. They were walking. I'm pretty sure it was our grandparents, right?
Yeah.
And they connected our parents, and eventually, him and I met. We were little kids. We didn't realize much. And when we moved away, we both lived in the same neighborhood. So from the apartment complex to the, track home housing community that we went to, we were probably, I don't know, call it 10 houses apart, 10, 15 max. So we're pretty close to each other.
Yeah, our parents are actually best friends too. And my parents are in India right now. My mom's shopping, and of course, things there are way cheaper than here. And she was telling me how she FaceTimed Neil's mom at 3 a.m. to help her find stuff. I mean, we're pretty close,
Yeah.
um, but not many people know who Neil is, right? And I think they do. They hear his name. Oh, I know Neil Patel. And what kind of like inspired me to do this podcast is to get like behind the scenes stories or context on people. So Neil recently was walking down the street, I believe in Beverly Hills, and that guy, I don't know his name, forgot his name, who walks around and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" And you explain what you do. And I was reading some of the comments, and people are like, "Oh, silver spoon, blah blah blah," like all these things that like are just untrue. Like Neil grew up like me in the most humble way, and I don't think people really see the true person when they see a lot of these interviews and podcasts. They just assume these things. And to me, I didn't get mad. Neil wouldn't get mad. Neil probably didn't even read them because
No,
who
I
reads
don't.
comments?
I
It's
wish
not
I
a
grew up
good.
with the silver spoon though. That would have been
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, it would have been nice, but no, we didn't. And that there's it's not an indictment on anybody who has grown up with a silver spoon, but like they just assume things. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to have Neil on board to get kind of like the behind the scenes, obviously get some marketing advice. The intent of this podcast is to share my community with others. I think a lot of people ask me for advice. They ask me for, I mean, how I got into photography, why I have, the following I do, and do a lot of things I do, but they don't really know the stories and the people that have inspired me. I have a lot of mentors. Some of my mentors are younger than me. Neil's younger than me. He's like a little brother, but when it comes to business and life, we're colleagues, right? And I think he could say the same of me. And something Neil told me early on, and it's very cliche, and you've all heard it a million times, but you really are a product of what you surround yourself with. And growing up, Neil and I, like he said, played in the same track home community. We I used to play basketball every day. He used to play basketball with me. One day in junior high, I knocked on his door and he did not want to play basketball. He didn't want to play basketball for the next ever. I haven't played basketball like that with him since I was 12 and I don't know, he was 10. It's because Neil like locked himself in his room and became the person he is today, right? Um, and during that period of time, I was really fluctuating between friends, figuring out who I was, getting an identity myself. And I had some great influences. I had some bad influences. I think everybody's during that period of time is figuring out who they are. I went to college, dropped out of law school, and Neil actually gave me one of my first opportunities. He didn't hand it to me. He like had a friend who needed uh, help at one of his startups, and I ground level worked for 30,000 a year to all you kids thinking that we had it made back in the day during one of the worst recessions, and I had 60,000 in student debt. And Neil was doing pretty well, but like he was like, "All right, figure it out. I can introduce you to this person. The rest is up to you." Long story short, was able to pay off my debt, and here I am now. But I know Neil's itching to say something, but what Neil
No,
told me is you are really a product of the five people you hang out with, right? And hanging out with Neil really brought me back to my roots and I think unlocked a lot of opportunity for me in many ways.
yeah, I remember when you were getting 30,000, you had 30,000, you got to pay taxes, and then you had to pay for rent and food because it was in a different city, so you couldn't live with your parents.
Yeah.
It was technically in a different state, but yeah, it was Seattle versus LA where we both grew up. And yeah, so you barely made enough to pay student loan payments and everything. It was tough.
Yeah. And there's all these assumptions made, and obviously everybody shares a different part of them on social media, so they don't see the struggle. But I was actually talking to Kenner about this on the last podcast. I can't imagine being a Gen Zer and being able to do that in this current economy and how things are kind of are, right? Like I was in a very niche market in marketing. Uh, Marketing wasn't what it is today, and opportunities were robust. Um, and I think Kenner kind of agreed. It's a tough time to be graduating or to be out of a job right now. Opportunities are far and few between. So, one of the reasons I thought of this podcast was to not only share the stories of, man, we're old now. You're close to 40, I'm 41. How it was back then, how it is now, and opportunities that may arise, right? So, Kenner talked about starting your own business, how AI can help you automate things, right? And how we're using AI ourselves. So I think the crux of this is what can people do nowadays to be competitive in this climate where it's really tough? Like I'm talking about back in the day, I was making 30 and I felt like a king. Like what can people do?
Well, I think no matter what time it is, because when we were starting off, the economy wasn't great either, especially when you were starting off as well. And I think there's different opportunities, and we may not be as quote unquote knowledgeable as some of them. And what I mean by that is like we're not as hip. Like I also don't know technology as well as some of these um, tech savvy people. Like I understand AI kind of. I understand it enough in my sector, but I don't understand it enough where I can just go build an AI company like OpenAI or Sam Altman or Elon Musk or anyone like that. But I do think there's tons of opportunity in AI for the young generation. There's tons of money in social media and influencer marketing for the younger generation. I think more so B2B for influencer marketing than B2C, because I think B2C is quite saturated. There's opportunity for them to start a business. It's so cheap to start a business versus when I started one, and even when you started your own business, it was much more expensive. Now technology just makes it so much more affordable. It is very competitive, right? We had competition, but not as much as we're seeing now. But yeah, I think the possibilities are endless, and it is tough no matter whether it's now or in 2008 or 2000. It's the real question is how can you figure it out and what's your edge? And I don't necessarily know what the answer to that is, but I think people have to figure that out on their own.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I had it made. I graduated. I was going to law school, was inspired. Obviously hated it. Dropped out. I think not many people know your origin story. I think, and maybe you could correct me, you met someone at a community college course and they taught you SEO, or how did that go?
Yeah, so I was taught SEO by myself, so self-taught,
Okay.
because I had a website and I needed traffic. But during a community college class, I gave a speech on Google's algorithm and I got hired for my first gig. I
What year
think
was
it was a
this?
thousand five hundred one time, and it turned into something that was around 5 grand a month.
What year was this?
Call it 2002-ish.
Okay. It's so funny because there's a period of time where I used to work at a Juice It Up. My uncle owned Juice It Up is like Jamba Juice at Cal State Fullerton, where we both went. Neil was, I guess you could say he was a student at the school. You'd see him every like once a week. He was doing a lot of online courses, but I would basically hook him up with smoothies. Right? I'd hook him up with smoothies. My uncle would be like, "Don't give him smoothies. No one gets free smoothies." Uh,
Dude,
and I
you
gave
would
him extra smoothies because he's family, right?
so he would give me such big smoothies, and I was driving an 89 Toyota Camry at the time, and I remember the smoothies you would give me. I would ask for a small one. You would always give me the biggest size. It would never fit in the cup holder.
Yeah,
And
give one for your dad too, right? Like, cause you,
yeah,
no one knows this, but Neil was making like big bucks nowadays, like you consider nowadays, and he was still living at home with his parents, and he was driving an '89 Camry with the remote that like automatically went around you, like the death remote. And
yeah,
I
this
had
is
no
seatbelt.
idea. I had no idea. So like for a good like 5 years, Neil was making great money, and my dad was one day was like, "Oh, Neil lives in Seattle." I'm like, "What's he doing there?" He's like, "Oh, he has a business." I'm like, "What?" And then, Neil comes, I think you come to the next like Thanksgiving party and you're like, "Hey, come
Uh-huh.
visit me in Seattle." And I go there and I'm like, I had no idea that you're doing this well. And it goes to show that like humility goes a long way, right? Like Neil's always been very humble. Obviously we all had phases where maybe we were less humble than we'd like, but Neil's always been the kind of guy where he doesn't really like showing off or telling people how well he's doing. And that really taught me kind of a lot of lessons on how to be an entrepreneur, obviously on like a lower level. But I think I think Neil has a lot of gratitude and he gives back. And I think that's what makes him happy, right? Because we're having a lot of conversations about life and what makes us happy now as we're getting older, right? And
Yeah.
well, what is that for you? I know you tell me it all the time.
I think for every person, it's their own. It doesn't have to be giving back, and I quite frankly don't do much when it comes to giving back. My wife does pretty much everything when it
Same
comes to
thing.
giving
Yeah.
back. Um, but I would say it really depends on the person. My satisfaction is just watching TV, hanging out with friends. I'm doing dinner with double tonight, you
Curtis
know.
too.
Curtis as well, yeah. Um, I love growing business. It's a sport for me. But you just got to figure out what works for you. Like with Double, he loves taking pictures, right?
I
I
love
don't know when
pictures.
the
I like
last time you
traveling.
haven't taken a picture or traveled.
Say that again.
I can't remember the last time you haven't taken a picture or traveled because I know you go through phases, but every year, multiple times you always say, I'm not going to travel anymore, I'm going to focus. And you don't have a wife, you don't have kids, and I don't mean that in a bad way. You love traveling. You have the freedom and flexibility. Why not travel and enjoy life and do whatever you want and go see the Northern Lights or go see a volcano and run down the volcano or, well, hopefully no one gets hurt, but you get the point, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah. Which
go,
I did last month, and I told him, and Neil was like, "What?
yeah,
We're really different people."
very different, but it's just like go and enjoy. I had him text me a picture the other day of his hike that he was taking. I was like, send a picture. I'll live vicariously through you. I'm not gonna hike, but I want to see the stuff that he's seeing on his hike.
Yeah. And optimize for happiness, right? As long as you're a good person, you're doing great things.
Yeah.
Um, I think you nailed the advice for people who are just starting off. And you've been asked that question a million times. I've listened to a million of your podcasts. Not a million, but you get the point. Like I've listened to tons of your podcasts, and I think that's the number one piece of it. A question people give and the advice you give is pretty standard, across the board. And I think that's good. In terms of marketers, what do you think they could do to adapt to AI? I have some things I've been doing, and I'd love to hear what you would suggest people do so they could stay relevant.
Test and use the technology. And when I say that, I don't mean just go and use OpenAI or ChatGPT or Gemini or anything like that. More so think about what are the KPIs you need to hit as a marketer, right? Which stands for key performance indicators. Like what are the main metrics, the goals and objectives you're trying to hit? And test using AI and running experiments, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or Facebook's version of it. I forgot the name. And just go and test things out and see if you can use them to help with your main KPIs. Like ours is leads and sales, and we look at leads and qualified leads. So, non-qualified lead. Then you have like marketing qualified leads. Then you have a sales qualified lead. And then we have, or technically in our business, we just do marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, and then a closed deal. So like I've been using HeyGen to translate my videos and interviews in multiple languages. And that's helped us generate a little bit more leads in some other regions like Italy, not noticeably enough where we're willing to invest tons of money into things like HeyGen and translating and transcribing. But it's better than nothing. It's a start. And that's what I mean when you should be running experiments is to see if you can hit your numbers.
Yeah, and how many countries are you in again? Your agency?
I think 19, 20, something
19
like that.
countries. Yeah, Neil's expanding big. And he has what I always loved about the scale and the growth of this is there's always an answer to a query or a consensus or debate, amongst people that work with Neil, right? And it's healthy and we're learning a lot from each other. One question I actually had on the last podcast was, will ChatGPT eventually take over Google? And my response was no, because ChatGPT will pump out one response. You can equate it to getting an orange delivered to your house as opposed to going to Whole Foods and picking which orange you want, right? But do you think there's a scenario in which ChatGPT does evolve to overtake Google and all the traditional search engines?
They're trying with Search GPT, but Google's also trying to combat Chat GPT by giving you that one answer at the top. I think what's going to happen is Chat GPT is going to get more popular, and search is going to turn into a similar game to social media. You look at social media, there's Facebook, there's Twitter or X, there's Instagram, there's TikTok, there's Snap, there's Pinterest. And we don't talk really much about Reddit or Pinterest or Snap, but they're still big companies, right? I think
Hmm.
Reddit, last time I checked, maybe like a 10-ish billion dollar company. Snap may be similar. I don't know the exact valuation of Snap from the top of my head. But when you look at these valuations, and I could be wrong on Reddit. Let's see, Reddit stock price. So Reddit is finance. Let's see. Reddit is I call it a market cap 29 billion. That seems high. Wow, I didn't realize Reddit was that big. Um, so when you look at stocks like Reddit, you know, they're pretty big. These companies are pretty huge. And when you look at that, it's just like, okay, how can you end up going after whether it's Reddit or Snap or Pinterest? It all adds up. One company's not going to make or break you, but if you leverage all these social channels, it adds up. And search is going to be a similar game in which there's going to be Google, there's Bing, there's ChatGPT, there's search on Instagram. People don't realize this. There's 6.5 billion searches a day that happen on Instagram. To give you a perspective, Google has 8.5 billion. Now on Instagram, people may be searching for friends or specific type of photo. On Google, they could be searching for a cheap laptop or a bike to buy. So the search on Google is worth more money than a search on Instagram, but nonetheless, there's search everywhere, and I think it's going to become more and more spread out. Heck, Amazon has 3 or 3.5 billion searches a day. It's quite a large number.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess safe to say that no one's going to take over anybody else. People go to search for different reasons. Like if I'm going to a restaurant, I'm not going to go on ChatGPT. I'm going to go on Google, Yelp. I'm going to look
Yep,
at the reviews, and I'm going to need to parse through that and figure out what I want. And I think that also
totally
goes
agree.
to the qualm or the not the qualm, the fear that AI is going to take your job. I was actually hanging out with the kids we grew up with, Shaolin, yesterday, and we brought this up. He's a doctor now, and you go to the doctor, you get your blood work done, but you still need a doctor to analyze that. And he was talking about how machines can like pump out, oh, you might be more susceptible to XYZ. But the doctor will look at some of that data and just be like, oh, this is anomalous. This is not true, right? Same with search, same with finance, same with marketing, everything. They still need people to analyze what's going on, right? And when it comes to ChatGPT, you're not going to go on there and say, find me the best restaurant in LA. It'll pump out one response. It's not going to give you any actionable data, right?
No, I totally agree with you on
So
that.
whatever search GPT does will just be like what Instagram did with TikTok. They'll just cannibalize some element of what they do and add it to like their offering.
Yep.
and all the queries are still coming from content that Google and Bing, who have the largest repositories of like data, are pumping out, right?
Yes.
So
And time will tell on what happens, but do I think AI is going to change marketing? Yes. Do I think it's just going to crush search as we know it? No, I don't think anything like that. But again, time will tell and we'll see what happens.
yeah,
Just like
I have a
just like Facebook has not crushed Snapchat. Like Snapchat, I'm looking at the numbers, 1.37 billion in revenue last quarter, and they grew 15.48% over the previous year for that quarter. And it's like pretty
I don't
good
use
growth.
Snapchat, but like I know people do. I'm
I don't use it at all. I
I
don't
mean,
even know if I
we're
have
like
an
aged
account.
out of that, but a
Yeah.
lot of younger people do. So
Hmm.
it's just gonna be a healthy marketplace for all kinds of things, then, right?
Yep, exactly. And it's just like you can't worry about Snap or AI or the latest thing or TikTok. Just leverage each channel for the maximum potential that's out there, and whatever platform wins or loses, you're on majority of them. They take most of the same content. You're good to go.
Yeah. Oh, what is Neil Patel most excited about in 2025? They could be business, personal,
Just
anything, you name it.
better economy. I hope the economy gets better.
Yeah.
And I don't know for sure if it will or not. Don't have a crystal ball. It's looking like it may be, but 2024 was better than 2023, and I'm assuming 2025 will get better. You know, Forget presidential elections, just in general, when economy is bad over time, in theory, it usually gets better, right? It's cyclical. And most people believe like it's a light switch and all of a sudden it just gets great. And you're not going to go from a bad economy one year to amazing economy the next year. That's extremely rare. You're much more likely to have a bad economy one year and not as bad of economy the next year and not a bad economy as that the next year and so forth so on. You fast forward 4 or 5 years and you'll notice that the economy is much better than it was 4 years ago. And of course, but it slowly improves, and I think 2025 is going to be a much better year than 2024, but I don't think it's going to be a blockbuster year where everyone's making more money hand over fist than they ever were before.
It's tough, yeah. And I was just thinking about 2008. Like, imagine if social media was as prevalent in 2008. Like, it was a bad year by historical terms. It would have been an even worse year if people were just opining and talking about it nonstop on
Yeah.
social media, because sentiment really drives a lot
Uh-huh.
of these things, right? So, like, if you think the economy's worse than it is, you're gonna kind of be tight. Even though you might have a lot of discretionary spending, you'll be really tight with how you spend and thus push down the economy more.
You're totally right. A lot of it is sentiment, and social media, I think, can make the sentiment better or worse. Um, I love social media from a work and a marketing aspect. I do think that it can also be bad, and for younger people, especially little kids, I do think it's terrible to have them on social media.
Yeah, it's really tough. Um, are you traveling anywhere soon? I know you've been taking a little break right now because you were nonstop. I joined you on a couple of trips. Let me
Yeah.
tell you, it's not fun when you're doing it for work and it's exhausting. I see him, so like we'd go to places together. I traveled quite a bit with him this year. He is a machine, but we'd always make time to do dinner. And so
Yeah.
I know one of your resolutions was to travel more intentionally and spend more time with the kids.
Yeah, so I'm trying not to do more than 10 trips. I don't know if Marina will actually follow. I know she's trying to follow instructions, but sometimes I break them and I'll tell her to just book it. But the goal is to do no more than 10 trips, and we'll see what happens. But I think I'm trying to be gone no more than 30, 40 days out of the year, 45 max, and I think I can stick with it. So that's the goal.
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks for being my second guest. I'll probably have you on a lot more. It's fun to just chat, right?
Yeah.
And then tell people how they can reach out to you.
NP Digital is my ad agency. All my social handles are Neil Patel.
And I heard this rumor. Is it true you're going to start your own standalone podcast?
Maybe I haven't had time. I'm going to. I should. But I'm focusing on doubling down on social channels right now. Working on fixing our ads and making them better for our own company. And then Mike's focusing on sales, but those are the main initiatives
Mike's
that him
Neil's
and I have.
co-founder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you should have your own podcast. I would love to watch it. Just
Oh,
like
cool.
this free
Thank you.
flow, you know? And maybe
Yeah.
if I get big enough, you'll make me a guest, you
There you go.
know? Well, you're freezing up a little bit. I think you might have some Wi-Fi issues, or it might be my end. But thanks for being on, and thanks for your insights.
Yeah, no problem.
Bye, guys.